So the book that I actually wanted to recommend you that I brought up here, it's called The Impartial Spectator, and it's a really good book. You can see some of Smith's quotes here, right? He says, "When I endeavor to examine my own conduct, it is evident that I divide myself, as it were, into two persons, and that I, the examiner and judge, represent a different character from that other I, the person whose conduct is examined into and judged of. The first is the spectator, the second is the agent." So when you're talking about like how people are behaving in the public sphere, and like this is the whole point of like why I was using the Joseph Addison's like spectator as an example, because the way that it ends up becoming is that we imagine like a hyper rational kind of being over ourselves, right? Who's like impartial and that who's like objective in his judgment. Who we imagine like basically that he's a novel reader and that he's reading a novel about us.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's how we then determine whether or not our conduct is like right or wrong in terms of like the public standards of behavior and public morality, is that we appeal to this imagined, hyper rational judge that's a creation of our own minds. And so we put it up over our own behavior. And so we try to assume this like hyper rational perspective in judging our own conduct. Right. And that's how like, Smith's theory of moral sentiments, like that's what it's all about. This whole idea of this judge, right, that you're creating in your head, that you're appealing to, I mean, that's like the same thing as, the idea of the public as like a pure abstraction, right? It's like basically is that you're anthropomorphizing and like turning into a character this hyper rational like public idea, this abstraction, and you're like making it into a person, and then like you're assuming in your imagination like the perspective of that person, right? And you're not really, the problem is that you're not really realizing is that I think is what you're saying, is that you're not really realizing that there is a subjective element to that the perspective of that like hyper rational like public judge, that's not objective.
Yeah.
That's like but that's the whole point of the economy of moral sentiments that develops like in the 18th century, is that because they needed a way to coordinate all everybody's economic behavior in the public sphere. And so if you can't appeal to an objective moral order, which is like what Locke did, right?
Yeah.
Like Locke is, Locke is appealing to this whole idea of there's just like, an inherent like moral order that God has imposed, right? And man just has to like follow it, right? And that man knows what the moral order of God and the universe is based on like, feelings of guilt or shame or things like that.
Yeah.
And then in the 18th century, by the time you get to Smith, that's all, changed, is that you don't have that idea of the subjective moral order anymore to appeal to when it comes to coordinating everybody's economic and like public activities, which includes like political activity, like voting and, consumption choices and opinions. Like what opinions are you upholding in your writing? Like, like that's exactly what we see today on Twitter. It's like, that's what people are mean when they are always using these stupid terms like signaling and counter signaling, and right?
Yeah.
And you're being contrarian. And what does that mean? I mean, that just means that like, according to the hyper rational judge or whatever, that you're contrarian to that based on like the idea is that it's supposed to be an objective arbiter, but it's not. And that's like the whole, that's where you begin to go off the rails.